All right, I'm going to give us 2 minutes for people to log in. And Stephen and Aaron, really appreciate you two being with us today. Aaron from Seattle. Aaron, you're in Seattle right now, right?
Yep.
And Stephen, you're in the other room.
I'm in the other room.
We're in Austin, in case for anyone who doesn't know, Stephen and I are married. Matter of fact, we just had our Texas wedding anniversary on Sunday.
What is a Texas wedding anniversary versus a?
Well, when the Supreme Court ruled that same-sex marriages were legal, then all of a sudden you could have one in Texas. So we'd been married in Canada when Canada first allowed back in 2004.
So you do different celebrations in different places?
You know, we have lots of anniversaries. And I expect anniversary gifts for every one of them. So.
There's so many opportunities for me to be a good spouse.
Exactly. So listen, why don't we, I see it's top of the hour and I'm going to get us started. My name is Eugene Sepulveda. I'm the CEO of the Entrepreneurs Foundation and the co-founder of Culturati. I have Aaron Hurst and Stephen Thomason with me today, and we're going to be talking about scaling meaningful connections in the workplace and society. But first, let me tell, in case we have any new viewers, Culturati is a community of CEOs, investors, scholars, and other corporate leaders that come together in various ways to kind of share our playbook on the power of culture to promote success and performance. We gather once a year at our annual summit. We gather around the country at seminars and dinners. We gather here on the webinar, Culturati Live, once a month. And then we have a biweekly newsletter on culture, a monthly magazine, Culturati Magazine. And we have published our book, the Culture Book, which is the first, and we'll be talking about a second here soon. It is, this topic, Aaron and I were connected several months ago. And when he started talking about the science of purpose in his work for a long time in that arena and the importance of connection, and Stephen and I, who have now been together for going on 23 years, regularly talk about and practice the importance of connection. I am detecting, as we emerge from this pandemic, that we're just seeing the tip of the iceberg on some mental health crisis and just personal crises about how do we reemerge into this new world after the lockdown. I think personal connection, meaningful connections are going to be critical to helping each other make it through this. So I'm here today with Aaron Hurst and Stephen Thomason. Let me give you a little bit about their bios. So Aaron is the CEO and co-founder of Imperative. He's an expert on the science of purpose and fulfillment at work. Imperative is a peer coaching platform that uses the power of peers to support each other over time to become increasingly effective and fulfilled. The science-based backed platform combines the effectiveness of coaching with the impact of building trust peer networks that are proven to build resilient and high-performing cultures. In 2014, Aaron published The Purpose Economy. He previously was the founder of the Tarpo Foundation, which connected skilled volunteers and nonprofits as part of the $15 billion pro bono service market. He has written for or been featured in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, World Economic Forum, Fast Company, MIT Sloan Management Review, and named a LinkedIn influencer. I guess I owe Michael Dix a thank you for connecting us, Aaron. Dr. Stephen Thomason is Associate Professor of Leadership and Administration. He holds a PhD at the Seminary of the Southwest. He holds a PhD in economics from Stanford University. He coaches and consults with Wall Street, Fortune 500, and high-tech startup executives and managers on leadership and communication strategy. He's a founding master teacher at the Acton School of Business for Entrepreneurship. He taught economics and finance at the University of Texas for about 17 years. where he directed the MBA Professional Development Program. He's also an accomplished playwright and performer. His award-winning solo shows have been produced in Austin and off-Broadway. So guys, thanks again for being here. I want to dive into it quickly. Whether we're in hybrid workplaces, have more remote meetings, less regular real world water cooler chats, as relates to meaningful connections in the workplace and society, what's the most important lessons we've learned during the pandemic? And before I ask you guys to answer that, Maria, if you'll drop in the chat the link, I'm going to ask participants to answer that as well by going to the link in the chat. But Aaron, let's start with you. You know, what are the most important lessons we've learned about connections during the pandemic?
Yeah, I think what comes to mind for me really is something that I've seen as a transition. It's tied to connection, but I think it's broader, which is, I think for a long time, leadership has gotten away with thinking about people as human resources. And I think what has really happened the last year is that that's just no longer something that you can sort of say with any kind of credibility. I think we've started to realize that actually the people that work in our companies are human beings, not human resources, and that they are biological creatures. And that fundamentally, like, their biological needs are the key to being able to build a organization where you have high-performing people, high-performing teams, et cetera. And I think a lot of companies gave lip service to that in the past. There was a lot of talk of that with companies renaming their head of HR, chief people officer, et cetera. But a lot of it, I think, was pretty shallow. And I think what we learned over the last year was that we had to recognize the humanity and the biological nature of the people we work with. Right. So that to me is the core, and that has a ripple effect in terms of all the implications for that. But that is a fundamentally different mindset about people, going from a robot on an assembly line to this messy, organic creature that sits in the desk beside us or over Zoom.
Mm-hmm. Stephen?
We had this experience that there was a massive disruption of our habit last year, and suddenly people were working from home with their families, their kids, their dogs, the rest of their embodied life. And as business leaders, a lot of you had to adapt to that and figure out how you were going to change your expectations and the way you supported people when they were now trying to contribute at work, but from an environment that was more complicated and not insulated the way it had been before when everybody was in the office. And I think that anytime our habits are disrupted, we recover some kind of creativity. And I think the thing that we learned was, first of all, people can be remarkably productive whenever they are supported, whenever adaptations can be made in the direction of accommodating their real life. And also that we figured as we moved into this new media and couldn't do stuff the old way, that sometimes how we interacted was as significant in our sense of belonging, meaning, as the content of our conversations, the substance of our discussions. And I think these are things that will, both of them obviously are persisting as we're talking about what it means to come back to work now.
Hey, Marie, can you share with us what the audience, how the audience is answering this?
Nice.
So trust, compassion, support, patience, understanding, authenticity. Yeah. These words bring up anything for you, Aaron or Stephen, to?
I think they're wonderfully positive. And I think that's encouraging. I think there's also the flip side of each of these, where we've seen, for example, with patience, I think there's been a lot of impatience as well. I think compassion is something that most people are still learning how to do. I think it's something that has been largely absent from a lot of our culture for a long time. So it's sort of I feel like there's a steep learning curve still on a lot of these. Mm-hmm. And trust, I think, is I love that trust is in the center of this. because I think that is the piece that's really, it's hard. We're built to trust by being in proximity to people, and having to change that is hard. Oh my God, everything has changed. Stephen, what's going on here? Genuine is now at the center and trust is to the side. I don't know, I guess everything's changed.
And I noticed that importance is now on the list. It seems like another piece of data from the pandemic worth paying attention to is, how did you reprioritize whenever suddenly it seemed like the time available or the modes of working required you to cut back? What did you cut back on? What did you move to the top of your list? And as organizations, that sort of forced experiment says something about how we think motivation works, which is tied to a sense of meaning and purpose for people. So what actually got done and what was put on the side, and how did that affect, how might that have been related to the productivity spike that we measured?
It's also, as you look at this, I think we're looking at this in the frame of the pandemic, but I think it's also really important to recognize two other major events that happened during the same period of time that are, I think, equally, if not more important when it comes to the topic of connection. One was Black Lives Matter and the rise of the need and understanding about our racial history, but also just inclusion, and the fact that there are a lot of people that just are fundamental, not feeling a sense of belonging, and that was happening at the same time. And then our political environment, which just showed how we do not know how to listen to each other anymore, and how isolated we've become. And so you've got these three things, in a sense, creating a perfect storm around connection, and showing the need for it in a way that I don't think, there couldn't be a louder signal coming in terms of the need to focus on this.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
What both of you are saying, the thing that keeps resonating with me is a superpower required for excellent leadership is empathy going forward. And empathy's always been important for leadership. I think the demands, kind of what you're saying, Aaron, about looking at the workforce as human beings, as human beings rather than human resources, and recognizing the skills and vulnerabilities of the workforce so that we can deploy, their best stuff. Leaders have to show more empathy. And I'm seeing that it's kind of coming pretty natural. I mean, these times that humble us are always lead to great growth. And I think, there was a humbling across the board like we've never seen before during this. Hey, I want to move on a little bit. So let's back up, and the need for better connection, the fact that we were misconnected didn't happen just because of the pandemic. We had a lot of need to get better at how we communicated in the workplace, how we make relationships in the workplace. Will you share your perspective on where too many of us misconnect or fail to connect in a productive and positive manner? Either one of you.
Yeah, Aaron, I'd be really, it's because you're studying this so closely, your perspective would be really interesting.
No, I think your point, first of all, is absolutely right. Cigna did that study that was published months before the pandemic started that showed 61% of Americans were lonely before the pandemic. And we know the biological impact
Right.
of that. And there's so many things that are contributing to that, from social media, which I think has been well documented now to be eroding social connection and eroding trust between people. And I see it with my own kids who are teenagers,
Right.
How it's completely changed the nature of relationships, or even just, I was telling something the other day, just in my family, when I was growing up, like watching TV was considered to be, like, as a family, like a bad habit and not a great way of connecting. And now the version of it is we're watching TV, but we're each on our own phones watching something else at the same time. So we're not even watching the same show at the same time. It's like how much that's eroded, so that quality time and interaction is missing. And then in the workplace, we've become more and more, I think, transactional in terms of how we interact with each other. And there's been more and more push for efficiency, and you get to a point of diminishing return around efficiency. And I think a big part of that is that lack of connection. And when we start to see that, we're actually seeing that it's not sustainable, and you start to see the creativity go down as well. So I think there's a myriad of things contributing to that. I think we've also just created a work culture where a lot of people don't feel a sense of belonging. A lot of people also just don't feel comfortable, in the term that's used as psychological safety, they don't feel comfortable being themselves. And when people don't feel comfortable being themselves, it is really hard to actually connect with someone, because you're not connecting with there's nothing there to connect with if you're not yourself. And that has become exacerbated. And just going back to social media, and that's a big part of what social media has done, is caused us, every single one of us, to have a personal brand, and every single one of us to be constantly trying to project this brand of who we are. And there's this level of competition between people and how they're perceived that just makes it even more challenging to have that kind of psychological safety. So those are just some themes that I've seen. Stephen, curious how you're seeing it on your end.
Well, I'm seeing much of the same thing. The amplification of social anxiety that happens because of the competitive pressure of comparison, which social media fuels in a really diabolical way. And if you want to kind of see just how, you see it in a sort of tragic and touching way, if you go on YouTube and you search for videos about no friends, there is sort of a trending phenomenon of potential, mainly younger males that are taking to YouTube to say, I'm a 28, 29, 32-year-old person, I don't have any friends. And they are, obviously trying everything they can to connect. But as they tell their stories, it's usually the anxiety they feel about being judged, about people not. And so that, puts a human face on the statistics that we're seeing about how epidemic loneliness is. And for me, it's not just that we're amplifying social anxiety and the pressure to compete, and which is not going to encourage authenticity and the sense of being understood or seen or known. It's also a matter of at work, the pressure to deliver more and more innovation or more cost cutting leads to people working from a part of their brain that's under stress and inclined to transaction and doing things that seem efficient by the standards of capitalism, but aren't the way people are used to negotiating, learning together, making decisions, finding motivation and meaning. And so one of the questions that I've had for a long time in my work with companies is, what are the small ways, the habits of connection, the micro experiences that unleash the experience of connection, meaning that are the antidote to loneliness? And can we get the same work done that we need to, but do it in a way that is not reinforcing competitive pressure, a notion of scarcity, usefulness of human beings as tools, but rather a place in which the contributions that you're making are ones that are unique, appreciated, and fundamentally opportunities to be connected with other people.
Yeah. Now, I think that the point about the social anxiety thing, it's so important. It's interesting as we look at the research on people who are saying they want to go back to the office versus not. And I think a lot of the people who sort of want to work from home, it's because they have a family, they've got a whole system there for themselves. But I suspect there's also a large group of people who are pretty much isolated, but they're starting to develop such strong social anxiety that they are actually scared to go back to the office. And I've been doing a lot more reading around agoraphobia, and I didn't realize the degree to which that's just really about trying to avoid social anxiety in positions where they will be socially embarrassed. And I am curious over the next couple of years, as more and more people decide to work from home, there's such a wonderful part of that, but there's also this other piece where people are going to be hiding from that social anxiety, and it's going to have I think a cascading set of effects on our society.
Well, you brought up, Aaron, the how many people want to go. So McKinsey just completed a survey of 5,000 employees around the world, what they find is that 60% of employees want a hybrid work environment. 17% never want to come back to the office. 19% always want to come back to the office. So you've got 20%, 20%, and then 60% who want to come back 1, 2, or 3 days a week. However, and I because of my political work, I'm always like, well, dice and slice those numbers for me. Tell me, what different demographics. Of new college graduates, 64% want to come back to the office. Now only 2% want fully remote. So, those that are still building their connections and their community really want to come back, and that are learning, not only, what we realized with frontline managers is that so much of the learning happens while they simply watch other more seasoned managers do their job. And so new employees get how much they're not getting by being in the workplace. Of people with young children, of course, they want to stay home more. Not that they want to stay home and take care of this kids, but they don't have an alternative. Employees with children that are over 18 are 3 times more likely to want to come back into the workplace. So that was just some, enlightening information I got off McKinsey.
I like stage piece. I think there's also a little bit of the hybrid definition. I think it's a combination of people wanting, partially in, partially out of the office. I think it's also, we have such a strong desire, especially in this country, for autonomy.
Right.
And I think also as an answer is, don't tell me what to do. I want the flexibility. Maybe I'll come into the office every day, but I want that choice. I don't want to be told I have to do that, because when I'm seeing companies say, that's great, we'll do hybrid, you need to be in the office Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. They're being like, hell no, that's not what I want. So it's not actually hybrid. It's more, I want autonomy and freedom to do what I want to do.
I see companies that I think are especially sensitive to the psychology of command, that are, their plan is actually to design value-added activity in a delightful space so that people want to come back to it or need to come back to it in order to make the contributions they've committed to the company. And that to me seems to be much more in line with getting the best out of people than telling them what to do.
Our Culturati, one of our steering committee members, Matthew Duncan, who's a thought leader at Microsoft on the future of the workplace, is saying that the workplace that we're coming back to should be the new offsite. Just as we design, when we're going to have an offsite, we were creative in how we wanted those spaces to look and how we were going to gather, so that it was much more about creativity and innovation, ideation, collaboration. and he's working on, I don't think they've put this out there yet, but is that what we should be returning to? So that when we're doing our email, when we're writing our reports, are we going to be staying home? But when we come back into the workplace, is that the highest and best use of enhancing innovation and creativity and collaboration? So, Aaron, you wrote The Purpose Economy in 2014. Tell us a little bit about that and how that's connected to where we find ourselves today.
Yeah, absolutely. And Stephen has an interesting little connection, I think, to your bio, which is my uncle wrote his PhD in economics at Stanford on information economy, and coined that term sort of back in the 70s. And that's really where the inspiration for the purpose economy largely came from, was a recognition. He had sort of seen the information and technology changing, not just like a niche of the economy, but fundamentally doing a rewrite of the economy. And what I saw with the purpose economy coming out of the Taproot Foundation was that our quest for meaning was actually causing behavioral shifts in the workplace, but also in consumer behavior, as people were wanting something different, and they were willing to switch vendors, switch jobs to get that need met. And that was driving a lot of the innovation that was out there. When I looked at purpose, and I studied it, so just quick background, the Taproot Foundation, the organization I started right around 9/11. There was this incredible thirst for relevance and purpose by professionals at that point. They're like, what am I doing here? Like, I see this crisis, I see all this pain. Is my job helping? Is it hurting? What am I doing? How can I be part of the solution, not part of the problem? And a lot of them wanted to give back to society, but didn't have an avenue for it. They saw the first responders, they saw the people doing that, and they're like, that's great, but I'm an accountant, I'm an HR professional, I'm a marketer, how can I do that? And I realized that the legal profession had a pro bono ethic where people could go out and do pro bono work, but the same wasn't true of accountants, HR, marketing, finance. And yet nonprofits needed those resources just as much as they needed legal. So built a whole movement around pro bono work outside the legal profession, and scaled that across the country, worked with the White House to make that a national market, and then worked with BMW and scaled that globally. And I share all that not to share my bio, but more just to share, like, what I was able to witness was, I think, likely the largest experiment in intrinsic motivation in history, and that we had tens and tens of thousands of people working without pay. They were working on top of their 60-hour-a-week job, doing 5 hours a week of pro bono work. And they had families. I mean, these were very busy people, and yet they were doing this. And we were able to figure out how to get them to complete the projects and to complete the best quality work they ever did by understanding the psychology of why they were doing it and what was motivating them when money wasn't the motivator. And that was where a lot of the insights for the purpose economy came from, because I started to see, like, these people are willing to give their time. People were wanting to do something differently. And the three things that emerged, people think about purpose as a cause, and that's not what we're talking about here at all. It's about meaning. And there's three things that generate meaning for us from a psychological standpoint. One is growth. When we feel like we're growing, that's a source of meaning. When we feel like what we're doing is making an impact, and that doesn't have to be solving climate change. It can be making someone smile. It's just feeling like you did something that, like, mattered to someone other than yourself. And the final one is human connection. Those are the three things. And those were the reasons why, when we interviewed and talked to people doing pro bono work, we said, why in God's name are you doing this on top of your job, on top of your family? And the most common reason was they said, I want to make an impact. But when you drill down, like, the actual real motivator that got them to actually do it, not just think about it, was loneliness and desire to make new friends. And they wanted to connect with people who had same values in an environment where they felt like they could actually build a connection with people. So when I first thought about purpose, I thought about it as a mathematical formula of, your fulfillment comes from your relationships plus your impact plus your growth. And you combine those and you have that. What I came to realize is that it's your impact and your growth summed, multiplied by your relationships, which is to say, if you have 0 relationships, but you're making a huge impact and you're growing, you're actually not fulfilled or feeling purpose. It's a multiplier. And even if you're making a little impact and a little growth, like, we found people working in the basement of an accounting firm where they're making very little impact, not growing a whole hell of a lot, but they had great relationships and they reported being deeply fulfilled. Because again, the relationships are that multiplier for people. So, I share all that just as like the context of what the book was about and the research, and showing, I think, executives that this need to meet this for consumers and workers is going to define, who's going to have the best teams, who's going to have products that truly resonate with folks. So I'll leave it there.
So, Aaron, I think I owe you an apology, because it's occurring to me that I have plagiarized what you did at the Tarpon Foundation. Marie and I, during the pandemic, during the lockdown, so the Entrepreneurs Foundation helps entrepreneurs in our member companies through employee engagement, community engagement, and we're talking, increasingly to fulfillment. And the ways that we've done that is created a lot of volunteer opportunities where people connect across departments, across companies, and out in the world, make a huge volunteer impact. I think last time we monetized it was grants and volunteer direct hours was $19 million to the community. And during the pandemic, we tried things about volunteering. It wasn't until we created what we call micro consultations, micro consultations, where we ask people to give us 1, 2, or 3 hours to name their superpower that they would like to share, to name a cause that they were passionate about, and whether they would prefer to share with a nonprofit or a small business.
Yep.
And we also call it the supply side volunteering, because after we got, that supply of volunteers together, we went and found nonprofits and small businesses that could best utilize what was being offered. And then we help define the scope and create the pre-work so that those 1, 2, or 3 hour volunteer opportunities made a difference. And they were wildly successful. Mm-hmm. People loved it. The clients wanted more. There are some ongoing relationships. I mean, just like round table mentoring. Yep. And I thought Marie and I thought we were being wildly creative, but I remember when you started the Topping Foundation, and I didn't know you at the point, but I was following what was going on. And I'm sure those ideas seeded what we just created.
No, and Diane Solinger, an old friend, I think, was involved early on. Now she's at Google, I believe.
Totally. And Diane's a great, dear friend of mine. Okay.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it is so powerful when people are actually able to, what it does, it brings nobility to your work.
Right.
It's one thing if you just volunteer generally, which is great and it's humbling, but to actually realize that your talents in marketing or HR or what have you actually have this greater ability to make an impact, and they're not just sort of narrowly defined around sort of a simple corporate purpose, it is incredibly eye-opening for folks. It's really powerful.
It's also eye-opening to think about how, if you have no relationships, all of what you are doing. I don't think that's true for everyone, but I think it probably is true for too many. That, if there's no one to share with or to even talk about it with, did the trees fall in the woods? I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's service without reflection doesn't lead to growth.
And
you need that space. And it's fascinating. I was on the board of Repair the World, which is a Jewish service organization when it was first started. And I'm secular, but a lot of the folks on the board were, deeply part of the faith-based Jewish community. And it was amazing when I actually got to the motivation, like, why did you start this organization? Why are you doing it? The primary motivation was to help create Jewish marriages. They actually created a volunteer organization with the intent of actually creating, Jewish marriages, because they know that service is one of the most powerful ways. It's the most powerful dating services that are, out there. And we had so many marriages at Taproot of volunteers who met each other, and people who are best friends still to this day, 10 years later, because they shared that experience.
That's great. So, Stephen, you've long been helping CEOs, other executives, teams make meaningful connections. Talk a little bit about that with us, would you?
This reminds me of a couple of years ago when Culturati asked me to do a keynote to talk about what's a theological perspective on corporate culture. I went and I surveyed some of my friends who are theologians, and they said, well, consider this. The monks who went out into the desert were looking for an experience of connection. They were looking for an experience of the divine in community. And for them, the purpose of their common life was to be connected, to learn, to forgive each other, to go on the human journey together. And in the course of doing that, they figured, well, we got to have a garden so we can feed ourselves. We have to build, shelters to live in. And as people started to come closer to their communities in their service for people who needed it, they had all these practical matters to attend to. But the practical matters were an outgrowth of their fundamental commitment to practice community as the greatest good. And I was just my theologian friend said, what if business was really just an opportunity for people to enjoy each other? What if it's a game that we're playing so that we can enjoy contributing our gifts, like Aaron is just saying, doing something together that we share that's making a difference that matters to us, but that the ultimate purpose of this is it's just music to dance to. It's something that allows us to be with each other. And I have taken that perspective, which seemed to me very wise counsel, and imagined, how would we do sales differently? How would we have meetings differently? If the objective were really to maximize a sense of connection, enjoyment, and being human together, and have found that to be a reliable inspiration for figuring out how to solve problems that companies are trying to solve about how they handle their communication, how they learn together, how they make decisions. The research that Minnie Kalan and I and her colleagues at Dell Medical Center just finished and published in the Journal of the American Medical Association, I think speaks to this very directly. We trained a group of college students to make phone calls once a week for 4 weeks to 240 clients of Meals on Wheels. And our goal was to see how much of an impact we could have on people's sense of loneliness, depression, anxiety, and other measures of mental health by a phone call that was had a generous intention. And I say that because there are a lot of studies that say that simply calling people doesn't have any effect on their sense of loneliness. And we probably all know that from work. There's a lot of conversation I'm having at work that makes me feel more lonely, usually because it's treating me like a tool, to use Aaron's frame. And so there is a quality of connection that either tilts one towards a sense of belonging or tilts one further in the direction of loneliness. And Minnie and I and our colleagues wanted to explore that. And so these college students, we only gave them 3 guidelines for these phone calls. The first was listen for clues as to what the person wants to talk about. And what was a key word? What was a mysterious reference that they made? What's something that they're offering you? Follow that clue. Right. The second thing was only make 1 point per turn. Ask 1 question, make 1 comment, and then hand back to the person and see what they do with it. And the third thing was ask open questions rather than the sort of yes/no questions we ask when we're troubleshooting or when we think we already know what the answer is or when we have an assumption we want to test. And it was really remarkable, the statistical significance of these results using the standard psychological measures of loneliness. There was a significant reduction in the experience of the people receiving these calls of reported loneliness. They felt less lonely after being engaged in this particular way. And so I'm interested in what are the smallest units of connection that we can imagine so that we can do our work in that way. And at work, I can just imagine if all you do is hear what someone is trying to tell you and follow that clue 1 or 2 steps, then that experience is like watering flowers all day. It's like, pulling weeds all day. It's the small sort of hygiene maneuver that makes your workplace feel different to people. And I'm, since this study has come out, am seeing, in a way, it explains the results that my colleagues who are using this approach to sales and to facilitating decision-making are getting at their organizations.
I've shared the links to the Scientific American article and the Journal of American Medicine in the chat for those of you that are interested. The Scientific American article is a greater overview, and the Journal of American Medicine will have a little bit more specifics. So you two, let's, Stephen, you talked about those. Let's try to drive this practical. So for the CEOs, CPOs, others on this call, what specifically can we do to make our interactions more meaningful in the workplace and make people feel more connected? And you guys keep posting your questions in chats. I'm going to come to them in about 5 minutes. So Aaron and Stephen, what are practical takeaways that we can give this audience?
I'm happy to. I mean, one of them that I loved when I was writing The Purpose Economy, I was interviewing Erica Karp, who's a CEO of an investment firm in New York. And she really opened my eyes to a very simple one, which is a lot of people, including myself, ask people, hey, Stephen, how are you doing? But I'm not actually caring how you're doing. It's just sort of like a way of saying hi. She said, what if you just cared what their answer was and like followed that conversation and actually like showed that you heard and cared about their answer? And I was like, wow, like that is such a simple thing. And we all ask people, hey, how are you doing? And I would guess 90% of people aren't actually listening to the answer or processing that. They're just sort of using it as a salutation. So that would be like a real like micro change, would just be to.
And let me plug in there, because when I tried this experiment, actually, at one point, Aaron, my version of it was to, before I asked people a question about how they were, I said, it's really good to see you. And then I would let the person have whatever response they did. And I would say, what's up right now? And I found that just that little micro intervention led people to take more risk in what they shared, or to respond, more wholeheartedly.
I love that. I love it.
I have this either superpower or curse that people share deeply with me all the time. So you would not believe what I get. And it's, I think people get that I'm authentically interested, and I can go way down the rabbit hole of helping you, deal with your mother who, fell, and I'll make sure that I am connecting you to the right, orthopedic surgeon in whatever city you're living. So maybe that's how that happens. But I find people's thirst for having that authentic connection in a safe way, so that I don't consider people to be whining when they answer like that. I find them more authentic and more trustworthy, and we're probably going to do more business together if we get into that level of relationship so quickly. But other practical ways to build connection in the workplace.
I cut you off. Go ahead, Aaron.
Oh, no, I think one of the things that we've really seen is that we have another epidemic, which is the advice giving epidemic in our society. I think this is one of the best ways to prevent connection, is giving advice, which we're all doing right now on this call, which is fantastic. I think this is the heart of coaching, is about fundamentally helping someone solve their own issues and helping listen to and validate what people are. But I think we've built a society where our value is defined by solving problems for other people, and that we do that for ourselves. So, talking about like a micro change, it's a really hard one, but just to become more self-aware about how often you're going into advice giving mode versus just shutting up and listening or asking questions. Super hard. It sounds simple. It's very hard. I've been working on it for a long time, but it's so core.
Another small one that fits probably into our habitual workflow: when you invite people to a meeting, back to Aaron's framework of relationship times growth plus difference, is let people know in just a one sentence, a personalized note in the meeting invitation, that the importance of what we're going to be deciding or trying to learn in this meeting, and what you imagine that this person can contribute that adds value. If you just do that much, people show up to the meeting not only in a different mindset and heart place, but typically better prepared. And that, I think, is a way of trying to redesign a small piece of something we're doing all the time in the direction of purpose watering.
Aaron, Stephen regularly reminds me to please give less advice and more provocation, to allow people to kind of verbally solve their own problems, and just to really find what's bothering them or where they need to go next. It turns out so many of us arrive at realizations and understanding by just talking out loud. And so we forget that our role as mentors, managers, friends, and just peers can be simply allowing someone to speak out loud. And then what I'll add to that is one of my great mentors in life, a woman by the name of Pat Hayes, who used to be president of St. Edward's University, taught me that the helping people discern the question was much more valuable than the answers. We can always hire people to find the answers, but a real leader, focuses on what are the most important questions.
No, and it's I think that's absolutely right. And one of my colleagues was really pushing a book that came out, I think, last year called Burnout. I don't know if either of you have read it. And Brene Brown just did an interview with the two authors, but the sort of idea that we're fundamentally emotional creatures who think sometimes, versus I think the workplace wants us to be thinking creatures who feel sometimes. And there's a fundamental difference there. The point, though, connecting it to Eugene, what you said was they talked about how emotions need to be processed or they fester. And I think a lot of when people are talking to us, they're not looking to solve anything. They just need to process that emotion. And that by giving voice to it, they're actually able to let that biological cycle finish for them. And we miss that point. My wife constantly is on. My wife's a very successful executive at Amazon, and she'll come home with problems, and I'll find myself trying to solve them. And she's like, "I don't need your help solving this problem. I've done just fine solving problems," which is always that reminder.
Yeah.
So I think that emotional, that recognition that we're fundamentally emotional creatures does change your whole mindset about work when you realize that.
Let me bring up some questions that I'm seeing from the audience. So Heather Bailey, hi Heather, it's good to see you on here. Her question's for leaders. How can they begin a conversation with a team member to connect, show empathy, and treat them as individuals, but not cross previously taboo boundaries? She says this is a challenge, and how do we not create and intensify social anxiety?
Mm-hmm. No, that's a great question. And it seems like a really important one. I think we have to start with the expectation that this is going to be awkward, that any movement that we make in the direction of being open to other people is breaking the habits of boundaries that we've probably drawn too tightly in the effort to be mechanical together. And that if you want other people to know that you see them as a human being, then you have to decide it's going to be okay if this is messy. To me, the boundaries are less about what people tell you and more about how we respond to them. And so in the spirit of not giving people advice, if I say to someone, I'm glad you had time to meet, how are you doing? And they decide to take that moment to tell me, well, there's a lot going on, and the stuff that they tell me is personal, it is messy, it's sensitive, then I'm going to say to them, I'm not going to give them advice. I'm not going to promise to do anything about it. And I may not even engage a conversation if I feel like it is crossing a boundary or getting into territory that is not my role, or that is, HR would tell me is something I have to steer clear of or make a referral. And what I can do at that point is to say just simply, this sounds really hard. You are carrying a lot. And if I see that and just reflect to them my experience of empathy without engaging the substance of their issue, I find I can usually steer clear of boundaries of the conversation going in some direction that's not appropriate for my relationship with them or my role. And I think it's also important that if people have mental health challenges or challenges outside of work that are affecting their ability to contribute to the team, that I think all of you as leaders know that you want your folks to be equipped to make referrals. Where does someone go that is blocked right now because of something difficult? But just listening to what someone would say for a while and let them know you hear it and that the feeling part of you understands that what they're going through is tough. It's hard to imagine a situation in which that would get us in trouble.
Heather, let us know in chat if we hadn't fully addressed that. Stephen knows, and many of the people on here know that my ability to stay within boundaries is my kryptonite. So I'm not well about maintaining those boundaries.
Not very, yeah.
But I've got to share that I never even knew that there was something called mental health first aid training. I went through it last week. There was about 4 hours of prep work, and then there was 6 hours online. You couldn't get off. There were a couple small breaks, but it was really helpful. And of course, it's all about having the resources to be able to refer someone. Not, you don't get any diagnosis but the informed empathy and questions that will help you lead people to the right referral sources was very empowering. And Maria, will you put into the chat the resource that we use for that first aid training? And I know that the Entrepreneurs Foundation is putting together another mental health first aid training session. So Aaron, anything to add to Stephen's answer?
No, I think that's right. I would say, don't ask people how they're doing if you don't care. Think about whether or not you actually do care. It's fine sometimes, maybe you don't care. Like maybe at this moment that's not, then that's fine. And don't beat yourself up for it. There's moments where we're open to it or not. I think you get yourself in trouble when you start doing that performatively instead of doing it authentically. So just checking in with yourself. Right. And I think more broadly, just going to the work that we do at Imperative, what we're doing is we're helping people every 2 weeks connect with a peer for an hour to talk through how they're doing in a way that's structured based on behavioral science to be safe. And what we're seeing is that this takes a lot of that edge off of the mental health issues. So certainly a lot of people have acute mental health issues that are chemical, et cetera. And then there's sort of the garden variety mental health that all of us experience. And a lot of that can be addressed by just simply having an hour every couple of weeks of empathetic conversation where you're able to express what's going on with you and to hear someone else do that. So it's reciprocated, not just one way. And when I think about that across a culture, what you want to do is avoid when you get to these moments where it sort of bottles up to the point where you're have a serious crisis. I think thinking about this more in terms of what are you doing continuously to create the space for that emotional content, that anxiety, that challenge to be expressed and worked through in a very safe environment. And traditionally we've said that's with managers. And what we found is like, no, that's not with your manager. It's not with HR, and it's not even with a coach, because a coach doesn't have true empathy. What we found is that peers really are the ones that are able to provide that for each other. And we really think this is the future of work. With people working in sort of these asymmetrical organizations and networks, is that the ability to coach each other and build networks for that coaching support is what's going to enable people to thrive. And it's going to be less and less about managers and more about that peer support.
Aaron, I just put the link to Imperative in the chat.
Thank you.
Anything else? And I had meant to get to that. Anything else you want to say about this your new startup, Imperative?
Yeah, I'm so encouraged by it. And what we see is just like thousands of people are doing this now, and they're having these conversations. And at the beginning of each conversation, so Stephen, if you and I were partnered, we'd ask each other in a word, like, how are you doing today? Right? And we'd each share a word with each other. And usually, not surprisingly, overwhelmed, stressed, anxious. These are the words that we see most often show up. And then at the end of the conversation, we ask each other again. So like, Stephen, how are you feeling coming out of this conversation in a word? And relieved, energized, relaxed, hopeful. These are the words that come out of that. And it's not because the person said anything genius. It's because they were able to feel connection with someone. And the neurological impact of that creates that change. So we keep on trying to solve this problem with all these fancy solutions. But the reality is just human connection. Just having an hour of empathetic conversation once every couple of weeks, like, totally changes our brain chemistry.
We need Raj Kumari Niaji on this call, who does this is right in her field. And as a matter of fact, for those that are on here, we're going to be having a session with Raj Kumari when we come back on the fall. Stephen Taylor's on the line. Taylor is a friend of ours from Berkeley. And he wrote, we're talking about the identity shift that happens when working at home. I'm a father and a husband first in this space. At work, my role occupies much more of my self-concept. At home, I'm more resilient in myself by nature. How do should we be bringing these worlds closer together? I mean, Josh Jones, Joe Worth, and I were talking, at the summit, how we think part of the remote world that was positive was how we got to know each other on a different level because we were in each other's homes, seeing each other's children and pets and messy houses on some Zoom calls, but that seemed to open us up in a way to collaborate and communicate differently. So what do we think about, should our personal worlds and our business worlds come together more? Is this what we talk about, bringing on our authentic selves to the workplace?
I mean, on a technical level, we are different people in different spaces and probably accessing different parts of our brain. And I have been talking to some folks who, in one environment, present themselves as hard-hitting, impatient, self-sufficient problem solvers, who, when I zoom in with them at home, I get a different part of their brain. And I feel like the conversation has more openness, more playfulness, sometimes more surprise in it. And it is just, interesting. It's the same thing that we experience in coaching when we ask someone, how would you explain this to a friend? And they get to the different part of their brain. So yes, anything that allows us more integrative access to our full creativity is good for parenting and good for, creating projects. I don't think it's so much a matter of bringing the spaces together. I think it's a matter of trying to learn from what were we able to do in this environment because of the different way it brought us out that was relevant to creating, collaborating, and stuff like that. And how do we make sure that whatever we're doing next doesn't go back to some comfortable compartmentalization that actually is not promoting creativity? And
so are you saying that we wall off parts of our brains when we come into the workplace, or parts of our human social capacities, because so are we depriving ourselves? I mean, is it the past practice that we deprive ourselves of some of our skills and capabilities when we come into the workplace?
I'll give a short answer, and this is my last offer because I realize we're getting close on time.
Yeah.
But I just know, I have noticed in my work that when I'm teaching people negotiation and we are role playing a situation, I start to see what their habits are of trying to get what they want, which are very much conditioned by where they think they are and what they think they're doing. And when I ask them I change the frame by saying, how would you explain this to a friend? Or what does it look like when your kid asks you for the keys? People will find other muscles that they have access to that actually make them more effective in the business conversation. So to the extent that I show up at work and I have a set of habits, I don't know that it's literally parts of my brain, but we could call it that. It's a set of mental habits that I engage routinely that may be limiting me. And I saw some of that being troubled by, in the same way people talk about daddy brain or stuff like that, at stages of your life when your brain chemistry actually changes because you have kids for 9 months, that people suddenly have full brain access. I don't know, but what the habits we form around this compartmentalization actually limit our creativity and are keeping us from doing the stuff we're trying to do.
I think you just answered Nate Little's question, and very, and so Aaron, let's end with you. Leave us with final thoughts on meaningful connections in the workplace and society.
I'll take it back to where I started. And first of all, I love the conversation about sort of human beings and human resources. And work is an artificial construct, and it was largely designed, if you go back far enough, as a form of power and control between management and people that you want to get to do things for you. I mean, that's really, whether it was slavery, whether it was around sort of class structures in the past. And so much of the compartmentalization has been based on that power and control structure. And we have to really recognize that that's where the source of that is, and that's not natural. If we went back 10,000 years, people didn't have work as we think about it, and these issues weren't there. This is not biologically normal to have this level of compartmentalization. It's all stemming from a desire for command and control, and we've got to let go of that if we're going to solve this issue.
So I know, Aaron, you're on the way to a board meeting. Stephen,
Yes.
you've got a meeting. Everyone, thank you so much for tuning in. Maria is going to sign us off. Chat will stay live for a couple minutes, and we'll look forward to seeing everyone back in the fall for Culturati Live. Thanks.